Hello and welcome to Geekverse Sidequest, your weekly stop for video game news, reviews, and more here on the Geekverse Podcast Network. I'm your host, the no longer innocent Dylan Muss, and I have with me the alchemist himself, Kirklin Patzer. Welcome back to Sidequest. Good to have you here today. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I can't wait to talk about this game that you and I both love the first one. So this has been a much anticipated sequel to get my hands in there, and it's been a super busy weekend. But I've managed to scrape some time away to play this and get fully immersed in this fabulous world that Focus Group, or just Focus Entertainment or something. What is it called?
Oh, Focus Home. Well, I think the studio is Asobo.
Sobo. Okay.
I think, yeah,
I was
that's
mixing
like
them up.
a publisher or something like that.
Focus Entertainment. Yeah, that's the publisher. Okay, sorry. Asobo Studios.
Just a
yeah.
random focus group that like funds the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are talking about a Plague Tale Requiem today, and that is it. No news, no other stuff. We are all about Plague Tale. So yeah, of course, me and you did a retrospective of the first game, the 2019 game, a few weeks ago. So everyone should go back and check that out. I'm very excited as well because we have not said a word to each other about this game. So I don't know. I don't know where you are. I don't know what you think, any of that stuff. But let's get some of the other plugs out of the way. Busy time over in the Sidequest side of things on the video game sphere in general. So good time to check out that Sidequest feed, subscribe to that, because in the coming days, you're going to get a Gotham Knights review. You're going to get a God of War 2018 retrospective. And do you know when you and Taylor are doing your Call of Duty review? Because I know that's coming as well, but I don't know when that's coming.
Yeah, I know he was doing Gotham Knights and I was doing Plague Tale this weekend, so we haven't really talked about. I mean, the full game's not even out till next week. They just released the campaign as of right now. So I imagine once we both get some time to play the campaign as well as the multiplayer online, we'll probably give our thoughts then. So within the next couple of weeks, you can definitely expect to see a Call of Duty review, which is crazy. Dropping a Call of Duty review in 2022. What are the odds?
I know, right? It's crazy stuff. I said that back when, doing, I guess, Game of the Year 2 years ago at this point, and on that, I had Warzone on my list somewhere. I was like, I never thought I would be talking about Call of Duty again in a big way, but here we are. But also, great time to check out the Patreon, because that God of War Retro will be up nice and early. You can get that almost a full week early, recording that tomorrow night, peek behind the curtain there, so you can get that nice and early. And then, yeah, just stay tuned to that feed, because there's a lot of stuff coming on the main feed. What is it? Black Adam just released. We're doing, I don't know, some retros. We're doing all sorts of news and stuff like that. But maybe most importantly is the 24-hour stream is coming up pretty soon here, where we'll be playing a lot of video games and doing other stuff as well. So it's always a good thing to be checking out there. What is the date on that? I don't know anything about a calendar.
November 5th. I even have this
November
little banner.
5th.
I'll pop up there. Look at that with the purple aesthetic.
I
Looks
like
beautiful.
the purple quite a bit. So
yeah, November 5th, 9 a.m.
EST. The 6th. That's crazy. 6th? Oh, my God.
I know, that's crazy. When we were going over our gauntlet send-off, we were just looking back on the years and like what years each gauntlet was. It's crazy how quickly like 6 years like that has passed away, because I mean, we've been doing the gauntlet even longer than the charity stream. Like we just morphed those matches into it, made it a major component. But yeah, that's wild.
And, may have pre-recorded something that's hitting up on that 24-hour stream over the weekend, and that was a lot of fun. So that's all I'm going to say, but make sure you tune in, because that is going to be a lot of fun, and I will be there in person. It'll be so nice to get the whole crew together in person. It has been, I guess, 2 years since that's happened, since everyone's been in the same room together. So
I know Travis was saying he's testing out some mics, and we might even try to do like an in-person cast, which is wild, to do the four-man, you, me, Travis, and Taylor. That'd be, because I don't remember the last time I did that, honestly. Like definitely pre-COVID.
It would have been
but
like
just
probably January, or I guess February maybe of 2020. Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go. Those are some of the plugs. Anything else, Kirkland, that you would like to shout out?
I don't think so. Like, we've been wrapping up a lot of shows lately with She-Hulk. We just did our House of the Dragon finale last night. That was lots of fun to break down. It's nice that these shows are like kind of ending, just because our schedule is so hectic, and
now all the games
life
are coming
is busy.
out. It's always one thing.
Exactly. So, but no, those were lots of fun. So definitely go check out if you watched pretty much all the shows that recently came out. Like Taylor's even doing Chucky. We're covering pretty much all of them. So check out the review feeds and all that.
Good stuff. With that, let's get right into it. So once again, Plague Tale: Innocence came out 2019, Asobo Studio there. We did our retrospective. Go check that out. And here is the sequel in 2022, A Plague Tale: Requiem. This is on PC, PS5, Xbox Series X, and Game Pass. And the Switch via cloud version. So, if you have a very, very good internet connection, you could play it on your Nintendo Switch. Isn't that a fun thought? But it's also on PC, so if you have Steam Deck, you play it there portably, however you want to do that. You actually bought the game. I played it on Game Pass, so how much is it? I'm assuming it's the classic $80.
Full price. Yeah, $79.99.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there you go. Get a nice discount if you're over on the Game Pass side of things.
Yeah.
I know it's on console Game Pass. I cannot confirm the PC Game Pass side of things. So, you look into that. But yeah, this game, I guess it would only be on current gen. They did not make this available for the PS4s, the Xbox Ones of the world. Kirklin, like I said, we have not talked at all. You're playing over there on PS5.
Yep.
How far into the game are you? I have no idea.
Yeah, I was curious as to how far you were, because I definitely put in a few hours. Like I think I'm in chapter 6 right now, so not too far. Like I said, I think that's like 4 hours into the game, maybe even more or less. I don't know, because I was doing it in like spurts throughout the weekend. Like whenever I found time, I would try and like power through a couple chapters.
Is our background image a spoiler, or have you done that part of the game?
I mean, I feel like I haven't seen like Open Seas or anything like that. It's funny, when I first jumped in here, I'm like Assassin's Creed Black Flag. That's exactly what this image reminded me of. But no, I mean, it's not really a spoiler, because I feel like that portion of the game was in the trailers, like leading up to the release, or at least them on a boat. I was on a boat. It wasn't as nice as that one, at least.
Gotcha. I think I know what boat you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, like I said, I had unfortunately had a really busy weekend, so I wasn't able to just power through the whole game like I wanted to, because I mean, if you heard my thoughts from the first game, I just like, as soon as I plugged into the first chapter, I just like did not want to put down the controller, and it's totally capturing that same effect for me. Like while I'm playing these games, doing the puzzles, doing the action sequences, doing the stealth, like it's just such a fun game to play through. Like I just don't want to put the controller down. I want to keep advancing through the story. I think they're doing so good with just the narrative again. Like that was, I feel like, my favorite part about the first game was like the story, the personalities of like the characters that are in it, not only just like our protagonists, but the supporting characters as well. And they're totally just like hitting that criteria so well in my eyes. And I can't wait to see what this studio like keeps doing moving forward, whether they do like a brand new original story or keep advancing this story. I love the way that they tell stories, and the games are just so fun. Like I remember if audio listeners checked out our first game review, like I was mentioning that the stealth mechanics weren't like the most complex by any means, but like it didn't really bother me because I was just in it for the story, and it wasn't like too easy to the point of just like, why is this even in here? Like it's just, like for a child, but it's a couple steps above that. But I think the second game stepped up the stealth mechanics even more, where there was a couple like puzzles, or not necessarily puzzles, just like different scenarios of like getting around guards and stuff that I definitely found more challenging than the first game. So I definitely think they boost it up in that regard. And because it is like the same character and she is similar, like, she gets new gear in this game, but you are using like the same gear from the first game. There is a lot of like, oh, I already upgraded this skill, but because I'm in the next game, I got to do it again. I kind of wish like it went a little bit further in that regard. And like I said, like I'm only in like chapter 6, so I can only imagine like you get more stuff like the further on you get in the game. But I think the way that they're able to upgrade it in like a quality of life manner with like the what would it be called, like the weapon wheel sort of thing, and just how
we'll talk about that. They completely changed around how it works for, I think, the better and the worse, but we'll get into that.
Yeah. So I think there's definitely like a lot of positives from like what they did adjust in it, so I thank them for that. For that effort, but not like a major drastic change. And it's fitting because it is the same character. She does have her same gear coming into this game. But yeah, with that being said, like I think the world continues to just be disturbingly beautiful. Like these areas that you
Right.
go to are so grotesque and like just nauseating at certain elements, but they're still able to capture just a certain beauty in the landscapes, even though it is like touched by a plague and the air quotes bite that's going around.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm totally blown away. Like like I said, I think they could have maybe went a little bit farther with like changing some of the mechanisms, but I'm someone that just I love the first game so much that it like if it just got more of the first game, I'm totally okay with that because I loved it so much. So yeah, I'm totally loving this one. Can't wait to keep going further on it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm curious. Like, have you finished the game already?
Yes,
Oh,
I
okay.
blasted through it. It dropped, a couple days early. Normally, it's like a
Right.
Thursday night, 9 p.m. is when these games go live for us over on PST. Sometimes you got to wait until the Friday, but this one, I guess, was up, I guess Monday night or I guess Tuesday night, whatever it was. And it's got a similar runtime to the first game, but yeah, I
Oh,
just
okay.
plugged through the whole thing. And Friday night, I did like a marathon, played for like 5 or 6 hours straight,
That's
and
awesome.
beat it then. So I think there was two sides to that. One was this game is very story focused, and I really wanted to see what was happening with these characters, where we're going with things. I did want to finish it before our review here. But also, I know that in a few days coming to Kelowna. I'm not gonna have my Xbox, so I want to make sure I
Right.
beat it before I don't have the console anymore for like 10 days or something like that. But then also, me and Taylor talked about this last week. I'm just in love with Grounded right now. So I was like, I can't play Grounded until I beat this game, or else I'll just play Grounded all night long. So I gotta blast through this game so that I can go back and play more Grounded. Not that this is a chore to get through or anything like that, but all of these things are swirling around in my head. I'm like, I just want to hyper focus on this and finish this really quickly. And I think it's a good game to do that. We talked about in our first review that how the length of the chapters and stuff like that, it's very conducive to that, where you could just go in and do a chapter, but it's like you always kind of get hooked into the next one, and the next chapter is maybe only going to be maybe 20 minutes to a half an hour. Sometimes they're much longer than that, but it's like, okay, I'm kind of hooked. I want to just see what
Mm-hmm.
happens next. And then before you know it, I was at the very end. So I did blast through it, playing over there on Xbox Series X Game Pass, of course. So I wanted to ask you, like, first of all, just what your before we go into my thoughts there, just like the technical side of things, how were things for you? Because I was a bit surprised that this game only runs at 30 to 40 FPS, and I noticed a lot of choppiness or frame rate drops,
Yeah.
some blurriness, even like there was something weird with like the motion blur and stuff, and I messed around with the settings a bunch, and like it just was not looking right. And then hours and hours passed, and I got used to it eventually.
Yeah.
Then I noticed some other glitches and bugs. Obviously we played the first game years later, so if it was rough at launch, we wouldn't have known that. They've patched a
Right.
lot of those things, and it was a very seamless experience. But this, playing it on day one, I definitely noticed a lot more of those bugs and glitches. Nothing too bad. I never had a crash or anything, but I did have some really weird freezes, and sometimes I had to reload a save and stuff like that. So I'm curious what how your view was it on just like the technical perspective, since you're on a different console than me.
Yeah, so like I said, like the graphics were absolutely gorgeous. I think for majority of the time, like it looks so smooth and like seamless, but there's definitely moments if like rats were coming at me, like it just totally got like choppy and
Mm.
like a little bit like just frame drops in certain areas like that. I haven't noticed any like freezes or anything like that. I also fortunately didn't have any game crashes, but there was a couple moments that it seemed like there was some weird effect on the camera. Like I jumped in the camera settings. I think I turned off like some sort of like shaky cam like setting thing.
Yeah, they
And
have like chromatic aberration, and then they have motion blur, which are both like kind of doing a similar thing.
yeah,
Like you can turn the chromatic on or off, and the blur, there's like 3 layers to it. So I feel like I tried every permutation of the three to get it to work quite right. But just like turning the camera on like leaves or grass, it was like something trippy is going on here, and I don't know what
yeah.
it is.
Yeah, so I turned that off, and then I found it like to be worse with
Yeah.
the shaky cam off. So I ended up just turning it back on because it just seemed a little bit smoother. And then because it has that blur, like you were saying, I think I was just getting used to it as it was going on. But
Hmm.
definitely every once in a while there'd be like an action sequence where it would just totally get choppy. And of course, you notice it in those moments, and it is unfortunate because I'm playing on my PS5, like everything should be running smooth, right? But when that wasn't happening, like the game looked absolutely stellar, and it's a similar thought to what we had for the first game, right? Like it's so blown away by the sun rays coming through like the trees and stuff, and just all of like the shading and the lighting effects. It's, man, like give them huge props for being able to do that, because yeah, like it's not a indie company, it's not like a AAA company, but it feels like a AAA, like visual, at least, like for how well everything looks, and like on top of all the building designs, the cities designs, and just the level designs, like on top of it, it looks phenomenal. But yeah, unfortunately, every once in a while, if rats were coming at me, I would get those frame drops.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that once again. The game is very beautiful, and some of the locations, like when you're on the water, the island you're going to, like just look absolutely amazing. And thankfully, like by that point in the game, I was kind of used to some of the weirdness with the motion blur and stuff like that. But when a game is this beautiful, and it is weird, right? It's like a AAA game, you'd expect they have a lot of this stuff ironed out, and you'd probably even have like 4K, compatible. You'd probably definitely get 60. I would hope on these current gen consoles. But we got to remember that this is not a AAA studio. It's something smaller, and it's just very impressive what they are able to put together. And I think that's why I wanted to make sure that experience was quite right. But there's just not a ton of options in the settings to customize the experience to be quite perfect. So it was worth, for me shouting that out. But it's definitely not like, man, boycott this game. It's like broken, all this kind of stuff. But yeah, to go into my thoughts. Kirklin, I'm feeling conflicted on this one, and I'm going to say right now that when you are done the game, we need to do another spoiler cast, because there are things that happen, decisions that are made, but ultimately, if I were to boil it down, I would describe it as I feel like this game, more than the first one, is trying to be a lot more ambitious with certain story stuff, even like gameplay wise, and with that, it's taking a lot of big swings, and some of those really land, and it hits in like very emotional moments, especially some things kind of tying in with the ending and such. But I also feel like there are a ton of misses in this game from the story perspective. Certain characters we'll talk about, and we'll throw some spoiler warnings, but obviously Kirkland's not to beat the game, so we won't go full spoilers, but we'll talk more in depth about certain things. But yeah, certain characters really kind of fall flat for me. And a lot of other characters that we, were introduced to, spent a lot of time with in the first game, just like don't do much in this game, and that's disappointing for me. I'll say this right now, Lucas, for me, we loved him in the first game. He's a really fun companion. I think they just had no ideas of what they wanted to do with him in this sequel, and I think you'll see that as you get further in Kirkland. But that to me is like a huge bummer, and there are other characters like that. For me. So, I mean, the great thing is Amicia and Hugo, your two main two, great, all great there. I have, some nitpicks I would point out, but for the most part, I think they did an amazing job with that. And that's the most important storyline you need to tell. But this is kind of a ensemble cast in a way. There's a lot of other characters that you spend a lot of time with, and they're trying to make these big bonds, either follow-up characters from the first game or new characters. And yeah, I think a lot of those missed the mark for me, and that's too bad. And then on the gameplay side of things, I feel like they give the player a lot more freedom in this game. We'll talk about that. But I think that also, obviously on paper, that sounds great. Okay, more freedom, hell yeah. And these like bigger sequences, you have more options with stealth and combat and stuff like that. But I also think that the game is just way more janky and imbalanced because of that. And it's not as tight with some of the puzzle design and things like that, where I think the first game had a really good cadence of, okay, here's this new mechanic, whether it's like light and fires, extinguishing, moving things around. Okay, so you get introduced to a mechanic, you do it in a very simple way, you kind of expand on it, do some other puzzles, and then you move on to the next thing. And then the next thing, will interact with that first thing, but it's like, okay, now we're introducing this new puzzle element. And they just kept doing that. And every like hour or two, you get introduced to new stuff. And it's like a good pace, and then the game's over. It's like, okay, sweet. Like nothing was super in depth, but it was like variety on variety. Yeah. But I don't feel like they add much from the first game in general. And I think that freedom just makes it a bit more of a messy experience. So I think overall, I would just say this is a lot messier game from the story and the gameplay perspective than the first one, because of its ambition. I think it kind of bit off more than it could chew, in a way. So I don't know if there's anything else I want to say just in a overarching sense, but any thoughts based on what I just said, or should we jump into the next topic here?
I think I could just add on to like I can definitely see where you're coming from with the like freedom for the certain like how you would tackle this scenario, because I felt like there wasn't really like too many clear areas to go. So there was a couple instances where I got past like a stealth section, and I'm like, I probably shouldn't have passed that. Like that, like I totally janked it there, and like
If
totally
you get through that
cheesed it.
door, you are good. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I felt like unfortunately I was relying that a couple times, and it was just like, well, that kind of felt dirty, but like, well, I'm past it now. Like I can't even reload the checkpoint. Like it just loaded there. So, yeah, where I definitely agree where the first game, like comparing that experience to this, it felt just a lot more satisfying in that, where I felt like every time I got through the stealth, like I deserved it. Like I actually handled that and like got through it. There might have been one or two that I kind of cheesed, but not as much as this one.
Yeah, I think that the stealth system has remained more or less the same, but I think you're right that there is some refinement there. In a couple ways, it's that very classic, like you're hiding in tall grass, you're throwing rocks at things to make noise, and it distracts the guards and all that. I think the big new thing they added is that you can like crawl under tables, and that does work well for me. I do like that. I think it adds some suspense when you just barely creep around a corner, crawl under a table, and then the guard like comes up behind you. And I think that is good, and then that's just like another navigational thing that's fun to deal with. And I think in general, like combat sequences and stealth sequences, you can almost kind of boil those together, mash them together in this game, because they do give you a lot more freedom on, like, you can kill a lot more people in this game. We'll talk about the story implications of that, but even just from a gameplay perspective, what would be, you could maybe look at in the first game, this would definitely be a stealth sequence. In this game, it's like you can take it either way. You could just kill everyone if you want, or you could play it in that classic stealth experience. And so not only that of like the classic Dishonored thing of like you choose how you want to play, but the areas are more open. So there's not like me and you aren't necessarily going to go the same way. And I think in the first game they did that a little bit, where it's like, okay, you can either go left or right, and you're going to get a slightly different stealth experience. But I think in this, they've made that feel less like a binary option. Instead, you just have these more lively areas, more open. And I think that is actually a big success of the game. But then I think the fact that you can kill anyone makes it so it's hard for them to balance a good stealth experience. Because ideally, or maybe that's not the right word, but you're probably going to end up doing some sort of hybrid, right? Where you're stealthing for the most part. Maybe you get caught, kill the guy, and then try to get back into stealth. Or maybe you'll just like kill a bunch of easy people you can pick off, or like maybe there's a sniper guy who's scouting out, so you take him out and then you're trying to stealth the rest of it. And I think they just had a lot of trouble trying to balance that, especially when you get some more, like, we'll just say stronger powers. You upgrade some of your gear later on and you become a lot stronger, that these guys aren't really a challenge on the combat side of things. So it's like, well, I'm probably better off just killing all these people. I guess the incentive not to do that would be for story reasons. Maybe you feel like your Amicia wouldn't do that. And I do want to talk about how the game tackles Amicia killing more people, because that's definitely a big part of the narrative as well. But yeah, just in general, I think the open areas, once again, pros and cons to it. But do you have any thought? I'm trying to think about where you're at in the game. You've definitely encountered a few of those sequences where it's like, oh, there's more options here than before.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I did appreciate that the game made an effort of like, well, if you go through this like a pacifist, like it'll just like it'll actually change the way that your character kind of progresses, and it's just like, oh, okay, like I can actually like think about how I want to tackle this, and like kind of put my own challenge upon myself of like, like you're comparing it to Dishonored, go through without killing anyone. Like I totally would want to try that in a game like this, because there was sequences when I found it just so much quicker to, like you said, like maybe take out like the sharpshooter, and then he's just not covering like this entire area, so I could just like go right through it very easily. But I did like I at least in the early stages, I was like really being patient and like just trying to go through completely unspotted, and that was very satisfying for sure. Later on, like I said, like I just felt like I was defaulting to just some of the cheese mechanics because it just made it so easy. Like as long as I go this route and maybe take out like these people and like use this reoccurring like ability, like I can just basically tackle any obstacle that crosses my path. So yeah, like they made an effort and I appreciated it, but I just kind of defaulted back to my old ways because the incentive maybe just wasn't strong enough. And like I said, maybe on like another playthrough I'll like really stick to it.
One thing too is like, was there a difficulty selector in the first game? I don't think there was.
I think there was. I think there was.
Huh.
I think it was the same as this, honestly, where it was like immersive, where like or story mode. Sorry, where you like basically have no challenge. Because I remember there being a hard, and I remember wanting to try it.
Maybe I didn't think about it as much just because it was like more stealth and like a little bit of combat in the first game, and now it's like, you know, how much combat is up to you. But there are a lot of forced combat sequences too, where it's like you got to just fend off like 20 enemies or something like that.
Yeah.
But did you find the game a lot harder? I found if I was trying to do a true stealth experience, I found it way harder than in Innocence.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I completely agree. And that's where I thought I was going to be able to just like stealth through it. Like
playing
like
on normal, I should say. I played on the middle difficulty. Yeah.
I was as well. I think I had it on hard for like not very long. I was like, oh, let's try this out. And then they just found me like really easily. And I'm like, well, I do want to experience the story. You know, like I said, I don't have too much time this weekend to play it. So I probably should just put it on normal.
I had one sequence too where I even bumped it down to the story difficulty, whatever it was. I at that point in the game, I was pretty burnt out on the combat. We can get more into that. But I was not enjoying this one sequence. I'm like, I don't care about doing, like, I don't care about the pride of like winning this fight. So I'm just gonna kick it down. But that was just for one moment, kind of near the end. Staying on the stealth side of things, the rats are back, of course. As you know, the I don't know if they can ever get away from that, even if they wanted to. Right? They try and make it so like you solve this rat problem a bit in the first game, but then, of course, they got to come back in some way. It's the name of it's in the title of the game, so now they're kind of stuck with that kind of thing. But I was curious what you thought about this, because you talked about how in the trailers, in our retrospective, that like they're doubling, tripling, quadrupling down with the rats, where there's sequences where it's like a wave, almost like a tidal wave crashing through a city, but it's like of rats. And I feel like that is the case for very specific set piece moments where there's a wave of rats chasing you. But when it comes to actual gameplay of stealthing around rats or putting fire up and using stick to walk through, I didn't feel like there was anything new with the rat mechanics. And I found that was actually one of my biggest letdowns of the game, is that I just found myself like bored through all those sequences because there's no new tools related to dealing with the rats. Really, that's kind of a reduction. But yeah, I just found like, man, none of these are interesting to me. They're kind of all the same as the first game. Not really challenging me or making me think in a new or innovative way.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair assessment. Because like it really hasn't changed that much. Like maybe if there's a couple new tools on how to like manipulate the rats, you know, in certain situations. But I mean, like fortunately for me, like I actually really enjoyed those sequences. Okay. I think I also just love the way that the rats are done. Like again, like if you kind of like have your torch and you get them into the wall and they get all janky and like twitch out, there's just some about it that I like, and just having that like constant chitter or chatter, whatever the hell they do,
sure,
the chitter
both,
chatter. Yeah. It's just it's totally, I don't know, it's something that's working for me, and having those like endless waves of when they just come through and flood like an entire level. It's like, okay, how am I supposed to get through this? And yeah, it's not too challenging because it's basically like, well, you light the one that's right in front of you, and then after that you light the next one after that. But I think I just love the whole mechanic of crafting like the alchemy ignifiers and like using them in that sense, and then maybe like, you know, using the opposite, like the extinguish one for taking out the guards and stuff like that. So that's just something that really hit well for me in the first game. So again, like I said, like if nothing was changed coming to this one, I probably would still really love this game. You know, maybe not love and dropping $80 on it for like basically the exact same game, but still, like I'm definitely able to still enjoy it for the most part because, as I said, like my biggest selling feature on these games is the story and the characters.
Yeah,
So that's definitely enough to get my money's worth out of it.
Fair enough. Speaking of chitter chatter, let's hear from our ads real quick, and then we'll be right back to talk more about this game. Okay, we are back. So yeah, let's talk more about that equipment. So I think this was a very smart idea here where they changed around the weapon wheel. Of course, there's always somebody in a sequel like this. It's like, man, am I going to go back to square one and I got to upgrade all my skills again? That's going to be aggravating. But I think they did it in a good way where, once again, if you hadn't played the first game, they tutorialize everything and let you try out sequences in a pretty low stakes scenario before you have to do the harder puzzles and things like that. And introducing you new mechanics that it's fresh and you don't just have everything from the first game and are overwhelmed, which obviously for us who just played the first game in the last couple months, that would have been fine, but I understand why you got to do that. And also a lot of people will not have played the first game. We talked about how that first game was kind of a low-key, maybe I don't even know if I would say cult classic or cult hit or something like that. Like, I think it is just a low-key game that didn't have tons of sales, didn't have tons of buzz. And I feel like that's actually the case for this one as well. I feel like I've barely seen anyone talking about this game, and it's only been out for about a week at this point. But usually, I don't know, I follow a lot of gaming podcasts, and not a single one of them has mentioned Plague Tale, which was very surprising to me because I thought this would, like after the success of the first game, even if it, like the critical success, the intrigue from players, I thought it would have climbed up. But anyway, that's a topic for another day. So now, the weapon wheel, they've simplified it. You have 4 selections on the weapon wheel, and then within of them, there are like 5, I guess, modes for each of these things, right? So you have your sling, you're just throwing pots, and then your crossbow, which is the new addition. And then for each of those, you can have like just the default version or the ignifier, like the fire version, the extinguish version, and then a couple other modes that I don't know if you will have gotten yet.
I got tar.
Yeah, you got tar. Okay, and then there's the last one there as well. So yeah, for each of these, yeah, you can set something on fire. You could throw a rock, you could sling it, you could do a pot, or you can do a crossbow shot. And I think that's a good idea because the weapon wheel's a lot simpler than it was in the first game, where you got like 8 or 9 or 10 things on there, and it became kind of confusing. And it was like, what does this one do again? And keeping the ammo types right for all that was very confusing. Where now it's like, okay, do you have fire ammo? You can use that on any of these things.
Yeah.
Do you have a pot? Okay, you can use the fire pot then. And the crossbow also has bolts, but then the slings and the default rock throw, you just have an infinitive amount. Which was that the case in the first game? I thought you had to get rocks as ammo. Wasn't that a thing too? To use the sling or like to throw, you still had to like pick up the rock ammo, right?
I feel like maybe you did have infinite because I don't remember ever like running out like in those combat sequences. I know the combat wasn't as intense as this one, but that's a good question. I can't quite remember.
Yeah, and then
we
you
just
played
played this like a couple months ago.
I know, right? You just had to replenish your like special ammo types.
Right.
So yeah, I think that is a good idea, but I also, where this becomes a issue for me is certain stealth sequences where I'll give it one example. It's kind of low spoilers, but there's a sequence where there's like fire on the ground, and you have to get across that fire. A very simple situation, right? And so logically you're thinking, okay, and look around my surrounding. Maybe I can, climb over something. But like, no, I'm probably gonna have to go through this. I tried running through it because it was like a foot. So it's like, okay, Amicia, you can run through this fire very quickly. But instead, she touches it and she's like, oh no! Yeah. And then she's like stands in the fire until she dies. But anyway, putting that aside, of course, that's what this game's all about. These little contrived scenarios, but we get over it. So of course, it's like, okay, I'm gonna use the extinguisher, and I tried. I threw my extinguisher. I slinged some extinguisher. And none of it was working. I was like, okay, well, I don't know what to do here. So I looked up a guide, and it was like, oh, you have to throw a pot of extinguisher instead. This exact scenario happened to me a lot, and on more than one scenario, I looked up a guide to see that, oh, you had the right idea. It's just that you had to use a different ammo type. You had to use a bolt here instead of a sling. And, a lot of it is contextualized, or I shouldn't say a lot, some of it where it's like, okay, crossbow bolts can go into wood. So it's like your sling your rock would bounce off that. So some of them obviously make sense and whatnot. But I found there was many times where I had the right solution, ish, but then because every one of these items has all of the ammo types, it made it confusing, and it didn't. That never felt good to me. That never felt like, oh, I had to use a pot instead of a rock. That was a fun solution to figure out. It was more just frustration. So I don't know if you feel the same, or maybe some of these sequences are later on in the game too. But what is your thought on just them kind of recontextualizing the weapon wheel in general?
Yeah, I mean, on first glance, I definitely thought it was, and I still think for the majority, like I do think it is a step in the right direction of just have everything like nice and generalized for like, okay, I need a specific fire pot or like a specific fire sling. Like it's just all there. So as long as you have the ammo, you can use it across the whole board, and it just made it a lot simpler. It's like, okay, this is how much fire I have. It doesn't matter if I'm throwing it by hand or using my sling, and I felt like it gave me that freedom to kind of choose what I wanted to use in that situation and like deliver the alchemy in different situation or different ways. That's a better way to put it. So I definitely like thank them for making that change. Again, it just made it a lot more simpler. But I'd be lying if I didn't make the exact same mistake as you. I just had like ignifier out, threw it on the rats, and I'm like, well, that didn't fucking do anything. Like, are you kidding me? Like, they're supposed to disappear, and then it's like, oh right, you need to use the pot, and then use the pot, and they just all like vanish. It's like, really? I feel like the ignifier would have done something there.
Yeah,
I feel like it even did something in the first game. Maybe it was a different version of ignifier, but yeah, it's not too clear on like what you have to use in that situation, because like I just said, it gives you the freedom where generally you can kind of do whatever you want, but then there is those instances where it's like, no, you need to use this specific ammo type or specific weapon type to handle this. And it is mostly just in the puzzle situations when those would happen, not so much like in the combat really. So yeah, I and like I just kind of defaulted to like pulling out like the certain thing, and then as long as like the indicator would go yellow, it's like, okay, this is what I should be using here. So like I kind of just defaulted to that method. But yeah, it was definitely confusing in some moments what you should be using.
Yeah, and one thing too, I don't know if this is just straight up broken, but in the menu there's like a hint system, and you can select how like the amount of time you want in between the game will like give you a hint. So you can make that like very quick or like no hints or longer, whatever it is. I tried changing that around, especially when I was stuck in those certain sequences, and I'd put it down to like the smallest amount of time. As far as I can tell, I never actually got any hints. So I don't know if that's broken or not. I could not tell. I messed around with some UI stuff, but I ended up actually having most things on the screen. The first game I had like no UI whatsoever, but I put a couple more things on. I put that stealth ring on that I was talking about in the retro that I really liked.
I had that on as well.
Nice. I'm glad that you got to use that. Do you like that? As much
I
as
did like it as well. Yeah, it told like, because then you can just know like your spatial surroundings and everything. And yeah, cool. I definitely did not use that like at all in the first game, because it was something new to me.
But yeah, it's unfortunate that the hint system just appears to be broken. So I don't know what else I can say about that.
I
definitely needed it now, and I don't have it. I didn't need it in the first game, but now I need it.
I know exactly what setting you're talking about, and I didn't play around with it, but there was one moment, I think it was like the first time you come across a character like throws a spear at you, and I was like waiting for it to tell me how to dodge it, because I died like 5 times in a row there, and then I ended up just like, I don't know if this is the way that like, if this is the way that you did it or this is the way that the game wants you to do it, but I just like took it off the chest and then like ran at him and took him out, and I'm like, I feel like I should be able to dodge that, not just like take it's like 2 spears like will kill you, and I just took one like right off of like just head on, and then I just took him out. I'm like, that's not very like immersive for me, just taking a full spear to the head.
It's interesting because there is no health point system in this game, and there's no dodging system either. So I think the way they do it is like whatever the first hit is, whether it's an enemy's like strike or someone throwing a spear, shooting an arrow, like Amicia will just do a dodge, right?
Oh,
so it looks like she did not get hit, but then your screen turns red as if like, okay, you're about to die. But then whatever that second hit is, if it's in within like 10 seconds of that first one, then you get hit and die, which is like, I actually really like that. I think that's very clever that you do this auto dodge, but I also think it makes some combat sequences feel kind of weird where it's like, man, I as a player, I would love if I had a dodge option.
Well, the first game did, right? It had a dodge, like a step back at least, because you do it in that like first boss battle.
Right. Yeah. I think you're right. I guess this game just does not really have that.
And that's what, and I was remembering that. So in
that's
that moment, I was trying to do.
Forgot about that.
Yeah, I was trying to like do it in that sequence, and it wasn't working at all. I ended up just kind of like ducking. And in hindsight, I don't even know if it was me ducking or if it was like what you said. She just auto dodges that first one.
Yeah, she was like a little sidestep kind of.
Because it looked janky every time that she would like get hit. So I just assumed that she got hit, and that was her like recoiling. But there you go. It's probably her auto dodge animation. I didn't even notice.
Yeah. And I mean that, to go into that as well, like I think the combat for me ended up being kind of weak in this game in general. And, like I said at the top, like they allow you to kill a lot more people in this game. They want you to indulge in the combat system more. Of course, they give you the crossbow as well, which, certain enemies have like a helmet on, so you can't hit them or you can stun them with your sling, but you can't kill them. But that's where you got to use the crossbow, and it's fun to have that. And bolts are pretty low. You can only hold 2 at a time until you upgrade that. So it's a pretty rare ammo type as well. So you would think it should be better, but I don't know. It just was not that fun for me in these combat sequences, even with these additional tools and having like, okay, I can put a fire crossbow shot on or whatever. Because I think the game still lacks a lot of freedom in the way you're supposed to kill enemies, where certain special enemy types have like armor and stuff that there's one way, maybe 2 ways to kill them, so you always have to kind of do the same thing. I found the shield enemies in particular kind of annoying to deal with, and I think it's just that the lack of a fun movement or dodge option makes the combat feel kind of sluggish. And most of these, like those bigger open areas we were talking about, are usually not too bad because you can run around and hide and stuff like that, but there's some like forced, what I'll say, combat arena situations where you're in this little small area and it's like this onslaught where 10, 20 maybe enemies will be coming out, and you just have to fight them and kill all of them before you can move on. And those sequences were the ones specifically that never felt good because of how claustrophobic it feels not to have a good move option. The only thing is you can like vault over boxes and things like that. But yeah, I think in general the combat for me didn't really work. Do you have the crossbow yet? I'm curious where your thoughts are. I forget. Where you get the crossbow.
I think I'm like on the brink of getting it, because it's like I'm definitely like I was using like the one on the ship, and then there's another character I think that like has one, if I'm remembering correctly. So it's like, okay, I know it's coming.
Almost have it,
yeah, and then obviously it was all over the promotion material, so I knew it was coming there for sure, which I'm excited to get it. But for in regards to the combat sequences, I've had at least 2 of those like a little arena like onslaught moments. And yeah, I completely agree. I think those are some of the moments that are just lacking so much. And something coming into this game from the first, I was really hoping that they would like just extend some of the capabilities that you can do, like maybe set like some traps or something, and just be able to move around a lot more just agile and freely, especially if you are more of a predator in this game versus the first one where you're very much like the prey. She's really just cranking it up in this one, and it's unfortunate that like, okay, yes, I can. They're throwing a lot more enemies at me, but I can only really tackle them, it's like, a little bit differently from the first game, but pretty much it's there. Like, go for headshots with your sling, go for the close material that's near them to like explode to blind them or something, or mess with the shield guys so you can take them out. And when it's a couple, like 1 or 2 enemies, it's not that big of a deal. But I feel like when it's just 20 coming at it, it's just like, when does this end? Like, it's okay, aim here, 2 guys, aim there, 2 guys, aim there, 2 guys, and it's just it really isn't anything that I'm loving in those moments. Fortunately, they're pretty limited, at least from where I am in the game. It's like a small percentage that I actually have seen those moments. It's mostly the moving around stealthily like and the story stuff. So fortunately it's not a big quantity there, but still it's definitely noticeable. And like I'm not even too far into the game, and I've already been pretty annoyed every time. And like you kind of know when those moments are coming. They're like, oh, stop her, and then they just come and she's like, no, I'm holding my ground. It's like, oh gosh, okay, here we go.
Here we go again. And then kind of going back to the equipment, one really positive thing for me is I just found like there was way less crafting management in this game. I just found like a third or a quarter of the time I spent of like just refreshing my ammo in the first game am I doing here. So that's nice. I think that was a good thing. Plus there's maybe less ammo types to replenish as well, especially with simplifying it so that you're only replenishing those I guess 4, because one of them is a default. So you're replenishing 4 types, and that's for all your equipment. So I think that is just another positive thing that comes with that system. And then even like upgrading your gear as well. There's 2 ways this happens. We'll talk about these because I think this actually is pretty good as well. So one, just upgrading your gear in the first game is like, hey, you need tools. That's the thing that's usually going to hold you back. And then there's like all these different resource types. Some of these resources I think are also used for equipment replenishing, but it's like I got to get 3 leather, 2 salt, 1 iron, whatever it was, and then you could get like this upgrade for your pouch, whatever it might be. In this game, they totally changed that, where you need tools once again. That's probably the thing that's going to bottleneck you. But then you just have like this one universal currency. I don't know. I forget what it is, but it's like
it's just like materials.
Yeah, it's just called materials. I think you're right. And so it's like that's way more simplified, right? Now it's not, okay, now I need to find like 2 pieces of leather out in the wild. And so just way less management of that too. I guess you could also say it has less depth to it. But I was totally fine with it. I think, so many games, I'm always criticizing skill trees and things like that. I think this game just simplified it from the first game, honed it in. There's not too much to upgrade anyway, so like why have this huge system? So that works well. And then kind of in unison with that is this, you have these 3 bars, which is like stealth skill, combat skill, and I guess alchemy skill. And so depending on how you do sequences, once again, if you stealth through a whole sequence, if you're combat heavy, if you're doing a little bit of both, if you're using a lot of tools, alchemy, and things like that, you just have this bar that goes up based on how often you're doing things. And I guess maybe how well you're doing those. It's kind of unclear exactly because it's not like, ooh, I got 10 stealth XP. It's kind of this hidden bar. But then when you hit these thresholds, kind of like Hugo, you get, different power-ups. So it's like, okay, I hit the first threshold for stealth. Now I move quieter, or I can move faster, whatever these things are. And I really love this. I want more games to do this, where it's just XP systems are just directly based on you utilizing a thing and your character gets better at it, because it just makes a whole lot more sense. And then you don't need a stupid skill tree where I arbitrarily get a point and then pick to move slower. I think this system works way better. It's contextualizing the world better. It's simpler. It looks nice visually. It's fun to see. Ooh, I'm really close to getting that stealth. I'm going to do this next sequence in stealth because then I can get that next bonus. So I think, simplifying the tool upgrading and that XP system, great as far as I'm concerned. Like, just perfect. Improvement from the first game. I really like what they did there.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Big improvement from the first game, and it's that was something I was going to ask you about, because the first time that you interact with like that bar, I think it's just after you finish that first sequence stealthily, and then it gives you like that increase, and then Amicia kind of comments on that situation, or like maybe it's her and Lucas that like, oh yeah, we did that. I'm paraphrasing, but something along the lines like they did it stealthily, like, right. And then this, I think the second instance that happens, you're kind of forced to do combat. So like Lucas is really like criticizing Amici in that moment, like you just popped off there and killed them all, and there was a couple
word for word, you just popped off there. Yeah. I'd love that.
That was fucking crazy. No, but so I was curious if. I mean, it's tough because, you beat the game and I haven't, but just how you would handle a situation when it gives you the option to kill people or not. Like, if that's actually just a scripted thing in the story that, like, they'll always say certain moments, or if I don't kill anyone the entire game, like, do they really treat me differently? And, like, how much does that change of a story sense? I didn't think there was going to be, like, that much of, like, a... like to the Witcher 3 level where like you can literally kill off like a whole storyline if you make like a wrong decision. So again, it's tough because I doubt you played the game twice to like do something differently on your first go around. So maybe that's something I'll have to talk to you about, like when I finish the game, just talk about how our actual experiences went.
I think it is. I don't think it's complicated. Okay. My guess would be that you have that forced sequence where you got to kill people, and then you have that cutscene where Lucas is commenting on Amicia doing that. I think there's enough forced sequences in the game where you have to kill people to make that narrative work. That is a big part of the narrative in this game, is Amicia kind of dealing with that. I would like it more than it is, but we'll get into that shortly. But yeah, I guess I didn't really notice any other times where it was like, oh, we did that without getting caught. Like, good for us. So I don't know, like maybe there is little lines here or there, but I think, when it comes down to like a actual pre-rendered cutscene, those kinds of things, it's like those are obviously going to be, sequences where you're forced to play through it in a certain way, because there is other moments in the story where you are not allowed to kill the guards because you're in a different place, and the guards here are like not bad people, so it's like, okay, well, you shouldn't kill these people from a story perspective, so it doesn't let you. If you do, it like makes you reload the save and such. So I think maybe in those sequences they talk about how we got through that without a scratch, whatever it is. But yeah, I think it's I don't think it's a super in-depth system with tons of these different dialogue trees that are gonna be popping out based on your player choice. I think it's more just like, we'll incentivize the players who want to play a lot of combat. We can give them some cool new upgrades. But to be fair, by the end of the game, I think I had maxed out both the stealth and the combat one. The alchemy one, I think I only got the first threshold. I guess I was not using a whole lot of that stuff, so you should do that. I'm curious
I'll go for it. Yeah.
What the upgrades are. But yeah, I think it's not like you're gonna have a totally different play style based on how you play. I did a hybrid play style, and I was, if I wasn't there, I was very close to maxing out both of those 2 bars at least.
Right. Yeah. I was curious about that because when it first introduced you to that system, I was really getting like Dishonored vibes where like if I kill a bunch of people, like there's just rats everywhere in the town. But if I don't, like it's a lot brighter and the story overall is just a lot happier. But then like when it get to that forced combat sequence, I took out like a few guys and it just seemed like she was going on like a rampage. And it was like, holy, it doesn't take much to really set her off. But it would make sense that is a story element because even where I'm at, like I can totally pick up on those like internal conflicts between like Amicia and like just killing people, and like that was something that was touched upon in the first game, and I feel like it's even more so in this one, which makes sense because the combat's more just easier to kill people with. So therefore your body count can get a lot higher, and just see how she handles that. I can already tell that is going to be a big part of the story.
Yeah, you know what, let's take our last ad break here, and then we'll get into story stuff. We'll break open these spoiler doors a little bit. So yeah, let's take our last break here. Okay, we are back. So Kirklin, you are currently on chapter 6.
Yes.
So let's open up the doors. We will talk about anything before or up to that point, talking about some of the characters and stuff like that. I mean, I don't think it still won't be a huge spoilery situation. Obviously, this is a narrative game, so people probably want to hear our thoughts on the narrative without getting too spoiled. So I think we're pretty safe to do so. I can say now I've beaten the game. I think until you get on the boat on our YouTube background, like I feel like that's almost like kind of act 1. That's kind of like setting up what's happening in the world and the game and stuff like that. So I feel like that's pretty fair. Maybe, I don't know. It is a pretty long act 1 if you look at it in that traditional 3-act sense, but I think that feels pretty good to me.
Well, that's why I was curious to hear like you say that it's similar length to the first game, because I don't know, I'm on chapter, I don't even remember how many chapters there were in the first game, maybe like 16.
I think it was
something
16.
like that. And so yeah, like I said, I'm on chapter 6, so I figured I was somewhere, half, maybe slightly under that. And then on PS5, like when you go to the home screen, you just hover over the game, it'll tell you like your current like load, or like like what my save was, so I can like continue activity like from the home screen, but it'll tell you like your percentage, and it says 23%, and I was like, holy shit, I'm not even a quarter way through the game. But I was also curious if that is like maybe including the collectibles and stuff, like because I haven't picked up all of like the Hugo's oh my gosh, I almost said herbivore, whatever it's called, the
herbivore, whatever.
Yeah.
I think you are probably about that length into the game story-wise, I would say.
And that surprised me because again, like I knew I wasn't too far into the game, but still, I feel like we have covered. I don't know. It's tough to say though, because I still feel like I am in like those early stages of like going to the island, and like they keep mentioning the island.
There are a couple of chapters that are pretty long, I guess. Yeah. So that would probably drag it out a good amount. But I think the game also just, even if the chapter length on paper, it's like, okay, the same amount of events happened, there are points when the game is like a lot more open than is like the linear structure of the first game and that whole, I'll say, pre-boat sequence of the game. So even though you have encountered one boat, but pre-second boat.
Or a barge.
Yeah. So I think that would, I think 23% is actually sounds a pretty damn pretty accurate, within 5-10% of like
okay, plus or minus.
Are, so, yeah.
Right on.
I want to just talk like in a general sense, characters. Like I think performances are all great once again here, especially we got a couple kid actors, or I presume they're kid actors. Maybe not. Maybe it's just like adult voice actors who are doing a kid voice really well. I'm not sure.
More impressive.
Yeah. Either way, the performances I think are all good. I think one thing that is a bummer for me is that the lip syncing really sucks in this game, and I was really hoping that would be a big step up. I don't know if that's necessarily like a console generation thing that would happen. I think that's more just like the budget of a studio like this compared to like a Sony who's making similar kind of games, but they have huge budgets and can do, all this motion capture and voice capture, which this game's obviously doing as well, but just budget wise, it's going to change things. So I think that was maybe a big thing for me, is it makes some of the emotional sequences, honestly, just makes them harder to buy. It makes it harder to believe in the characters when the lip syncing is very bad, and it really, I don't know. I guess I noticed it a lot more in this game because the game looks better. I'm playing on a bigger, nicer TV than I was the first one, and it's just like, it stands out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, it's a good point because it is pretty comparable to the first game, but it is just so much more noticeable because the graphics are just a step up. Like the first game looked phenomenal, but just like their faces and all of the costumes, they look phenomenal. But then when they're talking,
most of the dialogue happens from the third person perspective, so it's like it's fine. You're not seeing that, and I think even the eye movements, it varies depending on the character. I think like Hugo, his eye movements always look amazing. Misia's are sometimes okay, and some other characters it's like, man, this is a lifeless doll right here. It's like hard to feel investment in this guy's weird face right now.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like also like while you're traversing through the like just while you're playing and your characters are talking, it is sweet that they like move their mouth and everything when they're talking, but I don't think that was lined up like at all, and that's another thing that I noticed from the first game, and unfortunately it just didn't really improve coming into this one.
Did you... I don't know if I'm crazy here, but I feel like they changed all of the characters' faces, pretty much. Like, Amicia, to me, like, her face just looks completely different. Like, her hair and her, like, design, she's still got her weird elbow, like, armor thing.
Yeah.
But, like, I don't know. If we're to do a side-by-side, maybe I'll do this real quick. I'm going to pull up a couple images, because I just feel like they completely changed what some of these characters look like, which... I never truly got used to it, because I spent a lot of time with these characters. So to have...
that is fair.
Yeah.
I felt like I didn't really notice Amicia looking too differently other than like the cover photo, like for like the cover of the game. Like she just looks a lot more intense in that one, and her face looks different. But I feel like with Hugo... Yes, he looks different, but he also, he's a kid, and I know it hasn't been years, but I feel like kids just age so quickly. Same thing why Lucas looks so different, but I still feel like Lucas is
at most
couple
6 months, I
right?
think.
Yeah. kids age fast, man. But I feel like with Lucas, like I could still see his face in there. It just
I think
looked
Hugo
like
is the closest one. Is the closest one for me. It was really Amicia, a little bit Lucas, and a lot of their mom. I found Beatrice.
Okay.
I felt like they completely changed it up. So I got a couple images here. I'm gonna screen share.
Yeah, I want to see these side by sides.
Let's see. I guess I want to share my entire.
Because I was almost wanting Amicia to look like more different from this game, like just have a little bit more of a style, I guess.
Here's our innocent Amicia. I think this is a pretty, solid picture.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like Requiem, like this looks like a different person to me. Like the face. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe you don't see it.
She's murdered a lot more people.
Like obviously she's got the same hair. She's still white, obviously. Like she's got similar kind of garb and all that.
Yeah.
Okay, if you don't feel it, that's totally fair.
I'm not feeling it. I mean, she looks older. Like her face looks less.
You're telling me this
face.
is the same person?
It looks like, it looks
the
pretty
bone
similar.
structure.
She definitely has like a stronger jaw, I'd say, in this one, and maybe that's just what murders do to you. You look a lot more grizzled.
Yeah, it's true.
That's fair. Yeah, because she just looks, again, no pun intended,
trying
but
to
she
get
looks
it
a lot more
really
innocent in that first game. Yeah, and that's
like,
the one that looks the most different.
That does not look like the same person.
No, okay. But like
anyway,
siblings,
I'm over it.
like
But
they look
close.
close.
You know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, fair enough. I can see it. I don't know if I fully agree with you, but I see it.
It was just something that I could not get out of my head. Like particularly with Amicia, Hugo, like I said, was fine. But even when I look at the cover art of the game, like the little icon that's like on my Xbox dashboard. I'm like, man, these characters look a lot different. And I was like, okay, we're probably skipping ahead a few years. It makes sense. But like, no, this is pretty much picking up right where the first game ends. Like I would, I don't know if they say explicitly, but it feels like to me, it's like at least, I think they comment on like things being within the last year or like this thing happened.
I think
less than a
6
year
months
ago,
is pretty
right?
accurate. I think I remember them dropping that line.
Yeah. So yeah, you would think like, yeah, Hugo is a kid, but I wouldn't expect like drastic changes like that. So anyway, I wanted to shout that out. Yeah, what like I don't know who. Do you want to jump to a certain character? Do you want to just talk about the story hook overall? Where do you want to start with this? Do you think?
I mean, I want to start with my favorite character from the first game, Lucas.
Okay.
and you mentioned that he definitely takes a step back, and I feel like I can already see that from like where he is. I feel like there's a lot of potential with this character leaving the first game, coming into the second game, because he is this like apprentice alchemist who is really learning a lot, and like he's working to save Lucas or Hugo from the macula and just understanding it further. And now he has like a full on magistrar, is that what they're called? Magistra? Like what Beatrice would be to him, like his master essentially. I forget the name was for it.
Yeah.
But so like there's a lot of interesting stuff there, and there is, like once Amicia feels like maybe Beatrice and Vaudin, I think was his name.
Yeah.
Like might not be like having the best option for like Hugo's sake in it, and she feels like maybe she has to like kind of break away from that and like make her own decision for the safety of Hugo, her brother, and then she kind of like makes that known to Lucas that he's going to kind of have to choose between the two of them. And I feel like there's just so much great potential there. So hearing that like maybe they don't go too far with that is disappointing, because Lucas was like honestly probably my favorite character. Like, Amicia and Hugo, they got a lot more moments. So I probably would be lying if I said that Lucas was like better than them in that aspect of like the overall story. But I just really loved him. I love the voice actor from the first game. It's not the same voice actor in this. I get it, again, he's like a kid going through puberty, so he's got a deeper voice in this game.
See,
but
funny, I didn't notice that. Like,
you didn't notice it?
I would have thought it would be the same actor.
Yeah.
That didn't stand out to me.
It just, I don't know how to describe it. It just sounded, I don't even know. I would pull up the two audio tracks, play them back to back. We'll be doing the whole comparison game, but yeah, I don't know. It just sounded very noticeable to me that it was different. And again, like I was able to accept it because he is older, but I think even tying that into like your thoughts on like how different they looked, I think it would have been better if the game actually was like maybe a year at least like separated from the first game, because entering the first game, like it's really like sunshine and rainbows like in the beginning. Like they feel like they haven't really had to think about the plague like really at all, or the bite, or like the whole macula thing. Like it seems like it's been smooth sailings since that moment. And if it was like over a year, even like honestly, if it was like 2 years difference and like we really have our characters looking like significantly different, I would have been totally game for that. And it would have been such a big deal that the rats are coming back. And it is still a big deal, like because they're just such a devastating force. But I don't know. I think I would have liked it better.
And I think, now that I've finished it, I don't see any reason why they couldn't have done that. Like there's nothing that is like specifically based on 90 days after this first like rat bite is when this thing occurs. So yeah, that I think they definitely could have done that. On Lucas, I don't really I don't want to spoil anything. I'm not saying that he dies, because he doesn't die here. That's not why he's absent, but I'm just gonna say that like he is straight up absent from like most of the game. He's just not part of the story, and it's too bad. I just feel like they did not know what they wanted to do with him, but it's disappointing to me that he doesn't have any arc in this game. I would say the same for the mom as well. Like it is Amicia and Hugo's journey, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I think for me, like some of my favorite parts and why the first game was so endearing is that you'd have this home base that you get set up to, and you have your friends there, and you're almost like this little makeshift family. And they do time jumps, so a lot of that is you're kind of filling in the details, but it's like, oh yeah, I spent 2 months with these people in this place just kind of living. And even if, you're not seeing individual at each and every one of those moments, it still feels like that bond has happened. And so it feels weird to me that they kind of just don't really go down that same route. And I don't know. I feel like Lucas is the weird one for me. Like with some of the stuff with what's going on with the mom, which I think you've seen this, where like Hugo really wants to go to this island. Amicia wants to do whatever Hugo wants to do. And Beatrice is like specifically like, I do not want to go to this island. We're going to this other place. Like, you know, I guess light spoilers here. I was like, man, they're doing something with this mom. I guarantee you they are going to do, like, she is a villain. She is a bad guy. This is like, there's a reason she doesn't want to go to this island. She wants to go to this other place instead. That's not what happens with the character. But I was like, they're totally building up to it, but then they just like drop it. And all that makes sense. Like, if Beatrice does not want to go to the island and they don't want to go with her, that is okay. But I do not understand why Lucas was kicked to the curb.
Yeah.
Like, for the journey, once again, now that I've gotten to the end of it, it makes no sense to me, and it is too bad because I think they could have done so much with him. I don't know what that arc would have been for him of his like alchemist journey, but I think with any of these characters, you're just adding on, you know, something that makes sense for him in this new place, and I think they could have done that for Lucas. It's too bad they didn't.
Yeah, I mean, that is very unfortunate because I feel like the first game gives you all those ingredients to just keep that juicy potential going with these characters. Like Beatrice was always sus. She was always sus from the first game, and they have all the materials right there to just keep that going and then make it a very interesting story purpose. And I was getting those vibes even when I was just looking for Vaudin, and you find that he's just a total tool and carry my bags, like, you know, that character. And like just the way that Beatrice was protecting him and defending him, and I was intrigued about that dynamic. And because the first game has that like throughout of like Beatrice knowing more than she's sharing to like Amicia, especially in regards to Hugo, like it's all there. So that definitely is disappointing that they definitely had like a set story they wanted to tell, and unfortunately I feel like they just kind of scrapped some of the great setups from the first game. And you know, like it like I was so thankful that Lucas made it through that first game because I just loved it. It made sense on like why he would make it through, and again, like you just have this ensemble that we can like stick together, and like this is our team here. But just, you know, if we just push them to the side and don't really tackle them too well, it's just, well, like what's the point of even bringing him back, or like making sure that he lives through the first game, right? If they're not even tackling that stuff, that's a little bit unfortunate.
Yeah, I guess, you know, from one sense, it's like, okay, if they didn't need Lucas there to be introducing you to all these alchemies anymore because you've done them before, and they don't need him to like try and figure out what's wrong with Hugo because that was the journey of the first game. But it seems like, man, you had no ideas for Lucas outside of him being interested in becoming an alchemist. Like, there's nothing else about this. But
that was going to be the change in this game, you know?
I don't know. I just feel like, man, there was a lot of room left on the floor for that character.
Yeah.
So that's too bad. And, you know, so I think looking at the story in an overarching way, for me, the opening sequences and like pretty much up to maybe the end of the chapter you're on or the one after, I was pretty down on it. I was not a big fan of what they're doing with the story. And then also at the end, there's just a lot of messiness, once again, that I was talking about. For example, I don't need to go into spoilers on this, but just the game's main villain, super, super weak for me. So when that's like a, you know, big part of the finale and stuff like that, it's like, man, this is not working at all for me right now. That like very, very ending stuff, you know, those story beats in the end, those work for me. But for me, it was mostly like that middle section. So it was a sandwich with just like the worst moldy bread. And maybe that's like a bit of hyperbole, where I like that stuff in the middle, but like, man, the stuff holding it together at the start and end was super weak. So to go in depth on why the start is weak for me is mostly, I think, that I felt like the first chapters, the pre-second boat sequence, as we're calling it here, to me just felt like we were doing A Plague Tale: Innocence again. Where like the rats are coming out in this new place, but they're doing essentially the same thing. Hugo's freaking out and they need to find someone, an alchemist, who can heal him. And then this Vaudin guy who's clearly sus, doing weird stuff, is like, man, this guy's just a lot like the villain from the first game, isn't he? Like, obviously that guy was more of like a kind of religious figure. This guy's more of alchemist. He's part of the order, right? But they have a similar energy where they're a creepy old man who is spending way too much time with Hugo, that kind of thing. So it was like, man, we're going in circles. We've been here before. And like, yeah, the whole journey being we need to cure Hugo is like, oh man, I thought that's kind of where we were the first game, is that we're just going to do that same thing again. They end up going a different route later on. But even just like, okay, the mechanics here, things are mostly the same. You know, the rats, as I talked about, like that stuff's kind of all the same. So I just felt from gameplay and story perspective, we were redoing it. And part of me was like, are they trying to do this because they feel like not enough people played the first one and they think the second one is gonna hit bigger? It's like a current gen game. It's coming to Game Pass. It's gonna get a lot more eyes on it. So they're like, let's repeat a bit. Let's like do a quick, a 5-hour version of the first game, and then we go into like what the sequel is, where that does feel like the case on the island. That is a big, new, exciting place with a lot of new, exciting stuff. So I was just getting too many of those vibes, and at the end of the day, there was just nothing in those first few hours that was very compelling to me from a story perspective. So that's where I'm excited to talk to you when it's all said and done, because I think based off your opening introduction thoughts, it sounds like you're way more positive on the opening than I was. And so I'm hopefully you like that second part, kind of second act two, as much as I did. Because I'm like, man, this game's going to be amazing for you. But I'm curious why you're kind of on the opposite side of things for me, and why the opening hours, first few chapters have been working for you so much from the story perspective.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying earlier, like I feel like if I just got the same, like same but different from the first game, like all same mechanics, just like a new area basically to explore, almost like a DLC sense. Like I think I would have been satisfied. Maybe I would have been a little bit like, oh, $80 for this, but like still, like I'm totally loving like what I am enjoying there, and I was just so positive on the first game, and I think this game's intro was just. It was so good for me, of just because, like I was saying, like everything's sunshine and rainbow, super happy, like playing hide and go seek, and then reintroducing us to the mechanics, and it didn't seem like it lingered on that too long. Like
I liked playing hide and seek. That was fun sequence.
Yeah, so all that stuff was fun, and then it just like it's all fun, and then it just descends to like, oh, we should not be here, like we are in danger now, and it just felt like, oh, okay, like I am back in the world of Plague Tale, and it just feels so dark and creepy and scary and dangerous, really, and just that descent in that first opening sequence, it was chef's kiss for me. It just was so good. The way the music transitioned to just being like really ominous, and like again when like the murder elements are coming out, it's so funny too in that moment, because you have these characters with these like creepy masks that are kind of like beekeeper masks or something, and then you go through this one area and there's like bees around you, and you're kind of like swatting them through, and they kind of like almost get you caught, and I was like, is that going to be like the big threat, like instead of rats we just have bees everywhere? Like I just, again, it shows how little I really looked into like
Yellow
the
Jacket
for this game.
from the MCU pops in. Yeah.
It honestly crossed my mind. I'm like, wow, we're just gonna have bees now instead of rats. It's probably better that it is just rats.
Oh, that buzzing sound would have driven me nuts if we had that the whole game. If you have headphones on too, it's like, oh, creepy.
Yeah, that would have felt all over you. But like again, I think I was just so captivated by like where I was, and like in the city, and like all the vegetation that was like around in the world. Again, like it still feels like I am in a similar area of the world from the first game, but just like the climate of being like in a more tropical islandy sense, it was very it felt like a whole new game for me, and I think all of that was just really working for me, and just going out and kind of doing chores. Again, it's so similar to the first game, but I think I like that
exploring
aspect of like
fair. Dude, these developers love exploring a fair. This is the
and I was loving it.
Third time it has happened now, and it actually happens again in the game. You go through another fair at some point. They just absolutely love that. Which we always talk about that in shows. In TV shows, we just love when a character's walking through a market and you could see all these fun things on the side. Man, I love that these developers are just gung-ho on just taking you to a market and fair and things like that.
I just feel so immersed of like, okay, I do want to go check out all of these things, and like what can I interact with? Like when you go over to the lumberjacks, there's just like a giant saw, and Hugo's just like completely enamored by it. Like I just love those moments. So like for me, I think I was just still like, okay, I love the first game. I'm finally jumping into the sequel here, and they're touching, like they're totally hitting that heart aspect of like the relationship between Hugo and Amicia. It's something that I just love from the first game. Again, like you and I both like brother-sister dynamic, so like in real world, so bringing that into the game, it's something that just hits close to me, and I think I was totally happy with the way that it's been going, but I'd be lying if I said it's basically the exact same of what the first game was. Sure. And so I am excited to see like how different it gets. Obviously, there's no like boat riding in that first game, really. So I'm excited for that stuff for sure. And But again, like I think just the same formula of like tackling these puzzles and like lighting up stuff with your alchemy, like it's fun for me to get through. And as I mentioned, like the spoiler free section, just everything I'm doing so far, like it's just fun. I'm just having a fun time with it. So that's all good stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, I think when it comes to new characters, you've been introduced to a couple, but I think the main players all kind of happen later on in the game. So when we do another spoiler cast in the future, we can talk about that stuff. I think there's a couple of them that are very successful for me. One in particular is like on the level of a character from the first game, just like a Lucas or a Millie of the world, that kind of thing. And then there's a couple other ones that are all right. I think for me, like the fact that the villains, whatever you want to call it, are kind of weak is disappointing. But whatever, it's not really the, I don't know. I guess it's not really the critical path of the story. Like the villains, I think that's why I don't like them as much. Maybe in a way is that they almost feel like tacked on to like add some conflict at the end when there's like this very personal journey that is occurring. So I think that's part of it. But once again, we can talk about in the spoilers. But I guess we can talk a little bit more about Amicia and Hugo as our main two, of course. I think let's start with Amicia. Talking about her, so we talked about how like the fact that she's killing a lot more people is something that Lucas comments on, and I really like Lucas's reaction. Once again, we're big Lucas fans here, but just the way he's kind of freaked out by her, because there is more of a ferocity to her when she's killing people in this game, where we talked about in the first game, that moment when the first time you kill someone, like the game, like the camera like changes. There's like some blurry effect going on, and she like almost collapses to the ground because of like how emotional she is at what she's done, because she's saving her brother and all this kind of stuff. And she does kill more people in the game, some of it optional, some of it not. But it was something that they touched on, but they didn't fully dive deep on, and it was something from the trailers that I was like, okay, they are going to dive deeper into this. They want to really dive into Amicia's state. And I think they do that is done in a really big way. I think for me it was like they tackle it a lot at the start of the game with Lucas in particular, but then they just don't really talk about it for many, many hours. And then kind of towards the end is when they start diving into it more. And so I think the pacing of it for me is a bit weak, where I just wanted to hear more of like Amicia's internal dialogue, or maybe her having conversations with other characters, because I don't think it's a conversation that makes sense for her to have with Hugo, but someone else. I think I would have liked to see more of her dissecting just her thoughts and where she's at, as she just is a lot more unhinged in this game, killing all sorts of people, and the way she justifies it. So it's something that is iffy, but like for the most part is done very well, and it ties together with Hugo's story in a pretty good way, kind of later on as well. So I think that is something that they have done a pretty good job with. Not perfect, but pretty good.
Yeah. No, like I said, like I definitely have seen that, like we're getting some of that just with her dialogue with Lucas. And even like while you're playing the game, like if there's a situation that I could distract a guard or just extinguish his light and let him get eaten by rats, and Lucas is like, what are you doing? Like, you remember why we're here? And it's just like, fuck off, Lucas. I gotta get through this. Like, come on now, I'm cheesing this.
Yeah.
But I still think, like, even from the first game, I was wanting more of dialogue, like how you're saying, like her to kind of speak with someone about that. Not so much Hugo, but like maybe her mom really is the one I'm thinking of. But for other reasons, like maybe her mom's just a lot more preoccupied with Hugo. Maybe because like where Amicia is at, like she kind of was keeping a lot of things secret from her mom, like just with certain things that they would come across. So maybe it's not really someone that she finds that she can fully trust. I mean, she's already kind of going against her will of wanting to get Hugo to the island and not to Marseille, right? So that's a theme there, I guess, that she just can't really trust her fully, and that's. I mean,
funnily
it makes
enough,
sense.
I feel like the mom is the character who never cares about Amicia killing all these people. Like there are other characters introduced later on that, similar to Lucas, are commenting on what she's doing and like, man, do you really need to do this? Look at how it's affecting Hugo. This is like he's. His personality is changing. He looks up to you, and look at you. You're just murdering people.
Yeah.
But yeah, Beatrice, she doesn't give a shit. She's like, well, whatever. Like, I think that's also, to me, a character that majorly gets sidelined in this game way more than Lucas does. It's like, man, they had no ideas of what they wanted this character to be. But it is strange. I guess part of it is like most of the time when you're killing people, she's not there. But I don't know. I still feel like that is something they probably should have done more than they did.
Right. And I feel like maybe there's just not that character available to Amicia to really like confide with, and like maybe I mean the one that I think would have worked really well obviously isn't around anymore is her father. I feel like that would have been a really interesting dynamic, but he's
or even Millie,
he's not
but
around.
we part ways.
Yeah,
That's her name, right?
true.
But we part ways with her at the end of
yeah, exactly.
well, not even at the is it at the end? I think it's kind of earlier than the end, but at some point you part ways.
Some
with
point.
Her.
Yeah. So yeah.
What else did I want to say about Amicia? I think this too. A lot of the story of the first game is you're trying to figure out what the heck is wrong with Hugo, and you're doing all this research and finding out about this, decades long, or maybe not decades long, but centuries long kind of macula. This crazy thing that's going on. You're looking at his story, trying to fix him, and Amicia is just doing whatever she can to protect him. That is the case here again, but I think the way they contextualize her role in that as the kind of protector of Hugo, and the way that it's Hugo could not do any of this without her, and that like her being so important to it is, I think, very well done. That's something I really like, is that they make her feel like she's more important to that part of the story and the lore of it, the lore of the macula, and like this thing that occurred before them and will occur after them. Like it's just like this thing that exists in the world no matter what. It's kind of like it, like every whatever it is, 48 years he comes back whether you kill him or not, kind of thing. So I think that is very well done in this game. But shifting gears over to Hugo, I think it's well done as well. I think he's maybe one that has maybe less development from what his story is in the first game. It does feel like a bit of a rehash, but I think he does have a lot of great moments. They're all kind of later on. There's not much to him in the first hours, especially because he's like not even with you for a lot of those sequences, because he's just in bed, sick, passed out, having nightmares, awful stuff, poor guy. And too, we also talk about in the first game, there's a level or a chapter, whatever it is, where you play as Hugo. You do a long stealth sequence. I guess this is a minor spoiler. There is one of those at the start of the game, right? Is it the very first sequence of the game too, or is it like a second chapter? I forget. When you take over him.
I think it's the second chapter.
Yeah, because you're doing the like, I guess the hide and seek is like where the game starts, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you do play as him in that sequence, but yeah, like I said, late spoiler, you don't do that again. You're always playing as Amicia. So yeah, I guess you get a little bit less of that, but of course you're always like holding hands with him. You're always kind of a duo, but then you can like separate from him, that kind of thing. I think for me, one thing to criticize with, I guess, Hugo from the powers side of thing is that he, obviously we see that he's control over rats in Innocence. He does this, you do this as the player in the first game. And it comes back here I think a bit later on. I don't know how much you've dealt with that yet where you are. I think one thing though is like, it is very overpowered, and they didn't really know how to handle that, where it's like, okay, this sequence, I can just completely bust through it and not have to think at all. And that's too bad that there's like this, what could be a good sequence is like, you can just break it. Of course, that's up to the player, but like, if you're giving me this power, I'm going to use it. But then other times, it's like, man, why can't I use the rats to take over this sequence? And they don't really have a good answer for it. It's like, oh, there's too many rats, so I can't control like this. I can't control this subset of them. But then other times you can. I think there's really just no consistency to it. And there's even one sequence where it's like, oh, I can't control rats here because there's no rats around. But then you later find out that there was in fact rats around, but you just couldn't because the story didn't call for it at that point. So I think that's something that they didn't really know how to tackle in this sequel, and I also don't think they did a great job of making it super engaging, like being able to control the rats and that being a power that you have access to. Right. It is something too that they're like actively telling you, like, don't do this because it messes with Hugo's mind. Like, you should try to avoid this at all costs. But of course, as a player, like, I want to at least mess around with it and see what the mechanics are. And I think the answer is like not a ton. But maybe you could mess around with it more than I did. But once again, from a story perspective, I didn't want to mess with Hugo's mind as much as I could. So
yeah,
I don't know how much you've messed around with the rats in like being able to
Not so
control
much.
them. So
Not so much from Hugo's perspective yet.
Okay.
It's because I've, like you said, like he's mostly been in bed, and that's been the big shift from like this experience from the first game's experience. Is first game you're pretty much always with Hugo, other than like a couple missions here and there. But at the beginning of this one, at least, like after that opening sequence, like you really are just on your own. I mean, you got Lucas, but you're not holding hands with anyone for a good moment. And then yeah, I was just going through the barge and stuff. So it's definitely coming. I mean, even just like how their dynamic is versus the first game, like it is fun, like that they've just gone through. I mean, it's not fun, but they made it through and gone through so much.
Some hard times,
yeah, exactly. And I just love how their characters are showing that, like from this one, like you can just tell that they're very close. And even like Beatrice comments on that, like I can't fully explain like this bond that you two have, but it's certainly there and super strong. I can tell that you have so much love for him, and I think that's something that I love, because it reminds me of how amazing that journey was in that first game, of like going from where you didn't even know each other, and like now they're just like super tight. And I mean, yeah, as we're talking about, like I just can't wait to keep going on this journey. And because I mean, I haven't really had too much of that Hugo Amicia dynamic, and that's certainly like the golden part of these games is those two characters. So I can't wait to really fully dive into that.
Yeah, well said. And that is something that for me like completely works. And you know, one little thing too is in the first game you're going around collecting flowers. We talked about how much we liked that because it's kind of a fun personal moment. It's very cute. Hugo, puts the flower behind Amicia's ear, and has some story. He knows all about these flowers, and I love that in a very kid of his age kind of way. We talk about how it's only been like 6 months, but he's now just obsessed with feathers. That's like his new thing. He doesn't really care about flowers anymore. He likes them, but like, I could take it or leave it. I think that's very accurate to just like every 3 months, kids are just obsessed with some new thing, and that's like their whole world. I love that feathers are what he's into here, because it, once again ties in with these visions he's having of this phoenix and stuff. So it works in that way as well, and that's probably partially why he's obsessed with the feathers as well. And I like that the flowers they still exist. You can still collect flowers. There's way less of them in this game. And I think it's usually done in moments when Amicia is actually without Hugo, and she'll find a flower and kind of think back on a moment with Hugo, or oh, he would love these kinds of things. She'll put it behind her hair, or I think like Lucas, like it's like, oh, you look good with this flower behind your ear, whatever that kind of thing is. So I like that that's kind of brought into this game, but they decided to do something new and kind of fun, and the feathers are a good way to do that.
And like the moments too, I love those where you'll come across something, and then maybe, I mean, at least where I was, like her and Lucas would talk about something, like maybe it's a map of
definitely
Guyen, I think it was called, from the first game, and again, it's just a very quick little dialogue of a snippet from history, not history sounds like so much longer, but their history on just the journey that they've been through.
Lore,
yeah, and it's just that world building aspect, and it's not story crucial. Like you don't. The game kind of puts them off on these paths where they are like a collectible. Like you don't have to get through the game, or sorry, you don't need them to get through the game, but you can definitely find them. And it's the same thing with the flowers, where I love interacting with them, so it makes me want to search out throughout the entire map really and really find them. I've missed a lot. I was looking through like the chapter, and again, it just shows you like your stats. I was like, oh shit, I thought I looked through everything there, but clearly I missed a lot. But I'm glad it's a thing that they kept from the first game, and they've even like improved on it and has some more collectible stuff.
This game's got that classic, I don't know if you'd call it an issue, where it's like, oh, should I go left or right here? Like, what's the critical path? What's like the place where I go for 30 seconds to get the collectible and a little puzzle and then come back to do the critical path? So yeah, I definitely, because of that, I've missed a few things, but I definitely, like, I know it sounds like I blasted through this game, but like I did take my time in the more open areas, and I did go like actively out of my way to go check out this little like bonus puzzle dungeon where I can get some other collectibles, or upgrade for my gear, or those little story sequences, vignettes, whatever you want to call them. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of that stuff, and I think it's just better done. Like I liked doing these extra little puzzles. I think those are the ones that I found the most interesting, where you're trying to look for a little hidden detail or some crack in the wall where you can break a sling to open a door to do whatever this long chain of events, and I like those things a lot more in this game. So I think that's kind of it. Like, I obviously have a lot more notes, but I don't want to spoil anything for you in terms of characters or moments and things like that. I absolutely need to do a part 2 to this. So there are some things I need to deliberate on, Kirklin. So I'm gonna hold you to it. You got to beat this game. It's not super
happening.
long. So
no, yeah. Luckily, you know, I've made it this far. I'm a game and a quarter now, like into this world that we've set up on, and I'm just so glad that again, like we started the retro for the first game to lead into this one, and it's just such a, like I was mentioning that in the non-spoilers, like at this studio, like I'm just so interested in what they do going forward. I don't know how this game ends, if it's like a solid conclusion or anything like that, but I can't wait to see what they do next, whether it is continuation of this world or just an entire new original story. Like I have so much faith that if they follow the same formula, you know, not like rats and everything, but again, like they just introduce like a new world. Like I was so impressed by the writing of these stories and the characters that they introduced, and there's just that the games are fun to go through. So I'm definitely going to be maybe keeping an eye on whatever next game that the developers drop.
Yeah, and I know I've been a lot more negative on this episode, especially than our Innocence retrospective, but I still enjoyed my time with the game for sure. There are some amazing moments. It's just unfortunately clouded by some things that are kind of subpar or didn't live up to my expectations, especially like this is the struggle that any sequel has. It's like, you know, you got to, for me, I feel like you often have to deviate enough from the first one to have some intrigue to it, but you don't want to deviate too far to make it feel like this separate thing. And I think they just kind of fumbled some of that, but I still enjoyed my time. I mean, not to spoil my game of the year list or anything like that. Like, I don't think this is going to crack into my top 10, but I think it will sit just outside that. So I really enjoyed it, but like, yeah, it's definitely not the perfect sequel. And I would say I like the first game more just because it is a tighter experience overall, I would say, even if there are a lot of refinements here. I think it just came at the cost of some messiness as well. So, look forward to a spoiler cast that's kind of, I think pretty much as soon as Kirklin's done with it, which who knows how long that'll take, hopefully before the end of the year.
Hopefully within the week.
Hopefully. Oh, I'd love to hear that. That's much quicker than I was expecting. But yeah, look forward to that at some point. Make sure to subscribe to that Sidequest feed because who knows when that will drop. But it will be coming at some point for sure. But, you know, Kirk, when you said you were only on chapter 6, I was like, man, I think this is going to be a short episode. I'm thinking like half an hour, 45 minutes. But look at us, hour and a half. Why am I surprised every time? But I am. Like I said, a lot of great stuff coming soon, whether it's the Call of Duty review, whether it's Gotham Knights review. I cannot wait to hear Taylor and Travis talking about that one. God of War retrospective, just tons of good stuff. And then, I mean, in a couple weeks here, God of War Ragnarok comes out, and I'll be reviewing that. So, crazy good time to be playing video games. It's going to be a really fun end of the year. Very excited for it. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We will see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.